Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Michael Cherny. I'm the Healthcare Technology Distribution Analyst at BofA. I'm not going to waste much more time on my own bio, but we're here to talk about CVS and have a fireside chat with Sree Chaguturu, I apologize for that, from CVS Chief Medical Officer. With me today is Niyum Gandhi, Chief Financial Officer of Mass General. So I'm just going to jump right into questions. I'm guessing if I did a poll of this room, virtually everyone here knows what CVS is, has been in a CVS, has shopped at CVS, but CVS is now so much more than just that store. So maybe just to fill everyone in on the last 10, 15 years, what CVS has become as a business.
You know, it's a real pleasure to be here. And so CVS Health is now celebrating 60 years, our 60-year anniversary this year. And we started out actually here in Massachusetts. So we started out as a community pharmacy. And the story, I don't know if you all know what the name of CVS stands for. It stands for Consumer Value Stores. And so the story is, why did we go from Consumer Value Stores to CVS, is that as we were expanding our pharmacy, we had a corner pharmacy that couldn't fit the full name of Consumer Value Stores, so they had to shorten it to CVS, and I think that has been the name that's stuck. But we've changed from CVS Pharmacy to CVS Health a few years ago, and we are now a leading health solutions company. So when you think about CVS Health, the way to think about it is 3, now growing into 4 lines of business. The first line of business is CVS Pharmacy, as you described, which is a community pharmacy, over 9,000 locations across the country, providing a broad range of pharmacy and retail services. 85% of Americans are within 10 miles of a CVS pharmacy. There are 1,000 minute clinics that are located within those pharmacies, and I'll talk a little bit more of that on care delivery. In addition to our CVS pharmacies, we now have 2 health benefits companies. So one is Aetna. Aetna provides healthcare benefits for over 25 million individuals across Medicare, Medicaid, commercial, and the individual markets. And then CVS Caremark, which is our pharmacy benefit manager. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what a PBM does, but providing drug benefit coverage in a broad range of services. And then now we're building out a 4th service line of care delivery. We're not new to care delivery because MinuteClinic has been providing health services for nearly 20 years. Now has evolved substantially from acute care services to a broad range of preventative and chronic disease management services, over 150 services. But in addition to MinuteClinic, we have now extended into home services with the recent acquisition of Signify Health, 2.5 million home visits by 10,000 clinicians, as well as Oak Street Health with 21 states, 700 physicians, 120 locations, providing senior-focused, value-based primary care. So we're really excited, as you can see, from our humble roots in Massachusetts to now CVS Health, providing a broad range of health solutions.
And just quickly on that health solutions side, because these are 2 very recent acquisitions, what was the big impetus to try and drive into these areas beyond just the MinuteClinic offering, like you said, have been around for 20 years?
There's a number of macroeconomic factors that we see that has driven our desire to move further into care delivery. One is, fundamentally, we know that healthcare is broken in this country. 2, we also recognize that primary care is also a critical component, but has far to go in terms of the promise of primary care. 25% of people don't have primary care. 80% of people who do have primary care are looking for a better primary care experience. And we know when you invest more into primary care, good things happen. Costs come down, quality goes up. In addition to that, we see a wave of aging population in this country, and we know that people are voting with their own choices on where to get coverage, with 50% of seniors now looking for Medicare Advantage plans, but also primary care physicians that can help support that. In addition, we know that home continues to be a growing site of care. We just heard that in the conversation before with Kate. And so we look at these macroeconomic trends, and we think that given our foundation with Aetna, CVS Pharmacy, and CVS Caremark, and then adding in these services of retail health, home care, primary care, as well as support services, that we can be part of the solution of improving American healthcare.
And I love the fact that CVS has so many different touch points on an individual across various different businesses, but I do want to hone in on the pharmacy benefit management side in Caremark. And I know that this is something that I would say, even as an educated healthcare consumer myself, creates a lot of confusion. So maybe just to give a sense for everyone, especially standing here today, what is Caremark as a business, and also maybe more importantly, given the ongoing debate going on in Washington, D.C., what is Caremark not as a business?
Yeah. So CVS Caremark is a pharmacy benefit manager, which is a long-term, but fundamentally what we're trying to do is provide market access for pharmaceuticals. And let's start with the first principles of what is the problem in pharmaceuticals. We know that pharmaceutical pricing is just too high and the pricing system is broken. Last year, there were 1,200 drugs that were rising at 4 times the rate of inflation. And what a pharmacy benefit manager does, I can best answer by what do we do, who do we do it for, and how do we do it. What do we do is we work to address and manage the costs of healthcare, specifically pharmacy, by providing pharmacy coverage services. Who do we do it for? We provide these services to employers, to health plans, and to governments. And so we now have over 100 million individuals that are receiving their drug benefits. So nearly 1 in 3 Americans are receiving their drug benefits from CVS Caremark. And how do we do it? And this is the important part. We do that starting first and foremost with clinical integrity. What we're trying to do is develop formularies. These formularies provide a list of medications that then we then negotiate those prices within that formulary. So creating competition within the pharmaceutical industry to drive down the pricing. Once we create, starting with clinical integrity, those formularies, we then negotiate the prices on those formularies. We do that by to create the lowest net price, the lowest net cost, which is a list price and then a discount off that list price and those rebates that are then passed on. 98% of our rebates are passed on to those consumers, those customers that we talked about, the employers, the health plans, and to the government. And then after that, we provide a broad range of clinical services for adherence, as well as education services and negotiating with pharmacies to create access. So long answer, but fundamentally, we're trying to drive down drug pricing, and I would put forth as my final comment that we're the only part of the pharmaceutical distribution chain that sole purpose is to manage pharmaceutical pricing.
So it's helpful to hear kind of how simply you lay out kind of the role that the PBM plays in the pharmacy value chain. But the whole value chain obviously is pretty complex, and I'd love actually if you could go into maybe an example with insulin, right, which didn't work, right?
Right.
The industry
Insulin, yep.
The industry failed collectively, and from your view, from the PBM side and the other parts of the sector that you touch, what broke, and why did it happen?
Yeah, so insulin is a fascinating story. So we heard a lot of news over the course of the year about how manufacturers have brought down the pricing of insulin. But underneath that is the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act, which we've talked about a lot over the course of today, quite frankly, is also a very large healthcare bill. And in that, we're going to get a little technical and wonky here.
That's good.
But with the Inflation Reduction Act, to participate in the Medicaid drug pricing program, the way that it works is that there's a discount, a rebate discount off of the list price, about 23%, that then gets shepherded back to the states and to the federal government. And then there's an additional rebate for these drugs if the rate of the drug pricing inflation is higher than the rate of general inflation. What happened with insulin is that the inflation broke. It just continued to rise substantially higher than the rate of general consumer inflation. But there was a provision before the Inflation Reduction Act which said that the rebate that you needed to provide back to the government could never go below 100%. And so you couldn't actually make the manufacturer have to pay for dispensing that vial. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, they got rid of the AMP cap, which is what this is. So the manufacturers would have had to pay $150 per vial to Medicaid. So by lowering the price down, what it did was it allowed manufacturers to avoid potential penalties of up to $150 per vial. For one manufacturer's $400 million of potential excess costs. Another one was over 300. And so what happened here was regulation then led to a drop in the pricing so that they didn't have to pay the penalties. When we look at it, we've always created competition, and what we have now is that a majority of our individuals are paying less now in 2021 than they did in 2017. The average out-of-pocket cost is about $25 for anyone who's a CVS Caremark member. But the dynamics here, what you can see is that there's been this challenge in how manufacturers price and escalate it, and then how that impacts market access. So it gets pretty technical pretty quickly.
Well, and maybe just, I think in the way that you walk through the role of the PBM, it's, you're effectively creating that competitive bidding for the pricing, because much of healthcare, there's, supply and demand laws don't really apply. Right. You're in B2B to B2C economics, everything kind of breaks down. And so I think insulin's a useful case study of where, unintended consequence of a prior existing regulation, hopefully now we're in a better spot. But then I think about other spaces like, biosimilars, right? Where we think about high cost drugs, and then we say, okay, what'll happen is exactly what's happened over history. Patent life protects it for a while. Pharmaceutical company can, recover their R&D. Generic comes out, and we're off to the races.
Let's talk a little bit about biosimilars.
Don't seem to be working that way. So
biosimilars is an interesting market. And so, when we think about generics, small molecule generics, they are the same molecular compound as the originator product. And so there's a lot interchangeability once the generic comes out onto the market. Now with biologics, with biosimilars, they are not the exact same product. And so what you have is a biosimilar, and then there's a further designation by the FDA of interchangeable biosimilar. It's not clear that you necessarily need to have interchangeability designation to create market shift. So when we look at insulin, like Lantus to Basaglar, we've been able to drive competition 95% shift in the market to Basaglar without an interchangeability designation. But what we're going to see with in the biosimilar markets, we think that there's a real opportunity, but the story is yet to be unfolded and told. So you have the originator product, and what that can have is a list price and then a rebate that gets to a low net cost. Okay, and as you heard, as a PBM, we're looking to get the lowest net cost. A biosimilar can come in, they may not have a rebate, so they might come in at a low list price, but that list price might be higher than what originator product's net price, list price, and rebate comes. Sounds complicated. But what you're gonna see is that basically product by product, there's going to be this competition that's gonna occur between a biosimilar and an originator product. And ultimately, what needs to happen is market dynamics to create that lowest net price for consumers and the purchasers. What we're going to do as a PBM is to aggressively negotiate, and competition is good, and that's what biosimilars are going to do, is to create competition in the specialty marketplace. And specialty now accounts for 50% of drug pricing. It's the fastest component of pharmacy spend. Biosimilars give us an opportunity to create that competition and manage that pharmacy spend.
Given the lack of interchangeability sometimes, do you foresee risks around maintaining kind of formulary integrity and formulary compliance as a vehicle to kind of drive that lowest net cost?
So when we design formularies, we always start with a National Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee that is independent to CVS Caremark, of national experts that have to evaluate based only on clinical integrity. There's no cost considerations for this group. So they're going to be looking at what is appropriate for patients to make sure that they have appropriate access to the products that they need to manage the conditions that they have. So we are always starting with that clinical integrity before we introduce a formulary. And then we also allow physicians the opportunity physicians are in control of what they prescribe, and we have formulary exception process because we know that there are unique cases and circumstances where an individual might have a need for the originator product and not the biosimilar product. And for whatever clinical reason, we'll work through with that clinician on what's the right choice. For a majority of patients, the biosimilar, if it's interchangeable, will be the right choice, but for others, it might not be, and that's a case-by-case basis.
Great. Let's jump to a different drug category. This is fun. It's like we can jump drug category by drug category and talk about the economics of them. GLP-1s.
Okay.
So lot of discussion in the press.
Yeah.
We have the rise of the direct-to-consumer providers who are prescribing them, really aggressively.
Right.
We see obviously some drug shortages going on. How do you think this materializes over time? How are you guys thinking about it as a PBM?
These are breakthrough medications with breakthrough pricing. I mean, and if the way that we think about the GLP-1 receptor agonists, let's first start with what is the problem that GLP-1 receptor agonists are trying to solve. And what we have seen is the data clearly on diabetes and now with obesity and will be other indications. And we know that obesity is a significant problem in America. There were two conditions that were the CDC described in the early 80s as emerging public health threats. One was HIV, the other one was obesity. We have HIV fairly well controlled. Obesity continues rampant in the prevalence in America. And so we know that we have to provide more tools to fighting the obesity epidemic. And when I'm out with plan sponsors, which is employers and health plans, a lot of our discussion is to make sure that people understand that obesity is not a lifestyle choice, but this is a biologic disease that needs treatment. Now, GLP-1 receptor agonists are incredibly exciting because of the impact that it has in reducing obesity and hopefully also those secondary complications of obesity, and the trials will continue to unfold around that. But one of the things that we look at from a PBM perspective is two things. One is that when we look at this class, we see this as a class effect. We don't think that there's going to be competition in this class, and so we're going to be able to then go to manufacturers and say, what is the lowest net cost that we can have in this category so that we can bring down the pricing? It's not going to be just one drug. We see half a dozen drugs coming to the market where we can play and push for competition. The second is when you look at the trials also were designed where it's not just the drug, but it's also lifestyle and education support that's necessary to have the impact that the drugs had in the trials. So when we're working with plan sponsors, not only is it educating them that obesity is not a lifestyle choice, but that is a biologic process, we're going to bring the lowest net cost, but we can also provide those wraparound services of lifestyle coaching and support for their employees and colleagues so that they can get the full benefit of these drugs, and then also the adherence programs to make sure that they continue to stay on the drugs and have that long-term benefit of these medications. So again, GLP-1 receptor agonist, Niyum, the way I've been trying to talk about the PBM and its value, I think it's a great example of how we would use all of our levers to create ultimately a better outcome for American healthcare.
If I can ask a follow-up question on that front, because you mentioned a lot of what the PBM is doing on GLP-1s, but so much of the CVS Health approach is not just what happens in one segment of your business, but how it factors across multiple segments. So maybe using this as an example, what is the role that CVS as an organization can play to help manage the lowest net cost for your customers, not just of the drug itself, but making sure that you drive those healthy lifestyles, making sure that the cost side that comes through the medical component with comorbidities and whatnot can be eradicated and lowered as well?
Right, as we think about weight loss solutions, the way that so on the PBM side, we have something called Point Solutions Management, which allows for plan sponsors to pay for digital health solutions through using the PBM benefit. And so what we've offered in there is a broad range of solutions, such as Weight Watchers, which they can pay using their PBM. Because a lot of times, health plan benefit sponsors won't have a bucket of money outside of their pharmacy or medical benefits. So the ability to pay for these services using Point Solutions Management is an adjunct to the pharmacy services. In addition, that's an access to additional services. But we can also build, and we do provide those services ourselves. So when we think about weight loss, we provide weight loss counseling management in our Minute Clinics, and both in person and virtual. And what you have the opportunity to do is have access to the drug, but also to have that wraparound weight loss, chronic disease management services from Minute Clinic, virtually or in person, with a trusted local healthcare professional. So that's an example of how we bring the assets together to do more than just what any one singular asset could do.
Just maybe, since you broadened it across the entire spectrum of total medical expenditure, maybe the other thing on GLP-1s that's often on people's mind is there's the price question, there's also the utilization question, right? And so certainly there's appropriate utilization.
Correct.
And then there may be inappropriate utilization. You know, as you think about that net cost equation, how to bring net cost down, how do you think about utilization levers, right? So to stop inappropriate utilization, and maybe broader than GLP-1, you know, that may be an edge case,
Yep.
but to the extent there's inappropriate utilization, which certainly has then economic impact on different sides of your business, probably in different ways, but certainly for the plan sponsor can help them manage total medical expenditure if there's a different intervention they should
Yeah,
be
at
thinking about.
CVS Caremark, our client, our customer is the one who's across the table, and we're committed to helping them lower their net cost. And so that's our sole purpose. So, and you know what, the way that we think after we create those formularies is also to have a set of access programs like utilization management. Again, those utilization management programs are created with our National Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee to create the criteria and ensure that they're in alignment with the national guidelines and the standards of care. We cannot go above and beyond what the national standard of care is. Now, there are certain plan sponsors, I will say, that are concerned about utilization of certain classes of therapies, and it could be, for example, weight loss, where they would say, we're just going to exclude complete coverage of these medications. That's outside the realm of the PBM because that's what the employers decided at the benefit level. But if it is on the benefit, then we use formularies, utilization management, prior authorization to ensure appropriate utilization. We also do reviews of these programs on a periodic basis because the science is constantly evolving, and we want to make sure as labels expand that our criteria are consistent with the label expansion, or if we see inappropriate utilization, potentially with a physician, a particular physician will outreach to the physician's office or to the patients, or will reconsider our criteria. But you know, this is a constantly, what I want people to take away is that we're constantly evaluating this, and it is always starting with this notion of clinical integrity.
All right, one more drug category. Last year, this whole conference was about gene and cell therapy. So sitting from the PBM point of view, but then also maybe thinking about your Aetna hat as well, you know, gene and cell therapy, great opportunities in a lot of different therapeutic areas. How do you think about the cost, the benefit, the value equation, and how to help plan sponsors especially think about it?
So gene and cell therapy, right before the pandemic, we released a white paper to talk about what the potential impact of these medications are. Again, these are breakthrough medicines with breakthrough pricing. And these are generally for conditions that are rare, untreated, orphan conditions. And at that time, the pricing was around that we modeled was $500,000 to $1 million. And we saw this creating anywhere between an incremental $40 to $80 billion of additional expenditure into the American healthcare system. And so that's a small number when you think about the trillions of dollars that we're spending, but it was in such a small group of patients. And the other piece here is that with gene and cell therapies, whether it's ex vivo or in vivo therapies, that there's not going to be that much competition in any one class. So when you think about that competition lever, we're not going to be able to necessarily use that as a way to drive down pricing. So what plan sponsors are looking for us is, how do we create predictability in terms of the costs? And so we can create annuity plans that spread costs over time. So those are financial vehicles. We can work with manufacturers to create value-based contracts to help if the therapy works, or if it doesn't, the pricing would vary based on that. And then also is to make sure that we have the right centers of excellence and utilization management programs in place to manage cell and gene therapy. We're really excited about the promise of cell and gene therapy, and we think that these are going to be incredibly important therapeutics for individuals who have not had a promise of therapy before. But also when pricing is now pushing $2 to $3 million, we need to provide plan sponsors a set of tools that they can help manage these costs. And we don't want to impact access to these medications that can be life-changing for folks. So that's the balancing act that we're going to work through.
That's great. We're almost at time here. I won't do what David did, given that your last employer was Mass General Brigham, and ask what you miss about us. But instead, maybe if you look forward to the next 12 to 24 months and think about all the ways in which you're seeing healthcare, What are you most optimistic about in American healthcare over the next year or two?
So since I've joined CVS Health, I've had the opportunity, as I mentioned, 100 million plus consumers that are interacting with CVS Health, 5 million every single day I come into CVS Pharmacy. But I also get the opportunity to work with employers, health plans, physicians, and hospitals across the country. What I'm so optimistic about is even though we have an incredible set of challenges, the pace of innovation and across the country is incredibly staggering. And so I think the challenge for us is to identify those wonderful innovations and scale them rapidly. That's what we're really excited at CVS Health. Oak Street and Signify are examples of two innovations that we're really excited about to scale on a national level. But I'm excited about the level of innovation, and I think the challenge in front of us is just how do we scale those innovations.
Great. Thank you, Sree.
So, thank you.
Thank you.